Welcome to the Blaze Intake Real World Data Check number 6. Number 5 hasn't been posted yet. I just happened to see a video that was talking about the Blaze Intake and all the data they were getting, and the person was presenting the data, and their conclusion was that the Blaze Intake was much better than the APR intake that they had. And when I watched it, the first question I had was, well, what inlet elbow were you using? They didn't get into that in the video. In a discussion that followed, it was identified as being the APR inlet elbow. And I'm like, well, there's your answer. It's not the intake, it's the inlet elbow. Which is what the previous 5 checks that I've done of people's real world data. In every instance, they were going from a aftermarket intake that was using a inlet elbow. This is an inlet elbow, and this is the smallest part of your intake prior to going into the turbocharger. So the outlet of this part, its diameter, is the smallest cross-sectional area you're going to have going into the turbo, and that makes a difference. Most of these that I've seen are sized to work with an IS-20 or an IS-38 turbocharger, stock turbo, and so they're sized to fit with a stock turbo, which is around 49 millimeters at the outlet here to go into the compressor cover. In the case of the video that I was watching, the person was using a Vortex turbo. It's got a 56 millimeter inlet at the compressor cover. That's a good bit larger, and a stock inlet elbow isn't designed to work with that. This DBV2 is one example of an inlet elbow that is designed to work with a hybrid turbocharger. It's about 55 and some change diameter across. Much better fit. And from the tests that I've done, when you switch to something like this, it doesn't really matter. As long as you have a decent aftermarket intake, it's this point here that's going to make the difference. And in the case of the person who was given the testimonial about how great the Blaze intake was, they had gone from an APR inlet elbow, which is sized for a stock turbo, and in fact is the lowest flowing inlet elbow that I have tested. That's what they started with. They went and bought the Blaze intake and replaced all the APR stuff with that and got better results. Well, no surprise. You replace a stock sized inlet elbow with one that is sized for the turbo that you're using, and they got much better results. And not just sized for the stock turbo, but the lowest flowing one sized for a stock turbo, and then they went to a part that was sized appropriately for the turbocharger that they were using. So in the end, it wasn't a wrong thing to do. You can throw away an entire intake system just to replace the inlet elbow. You're spending an extra $350 to $400 on intake components that are completely unnecessary. And in fact, the APR intake, when used with a suitable inlet elbow, actually performs a little bit better than the Blaze intake, but it's negligible difference. So if you again, Blaze intake, not a bad product at all, but people are going and buying it, and they're switching from something where they had a stock part and going to an aftermarket one, or not stock, but stock size, to that hybrid flange that the Blaze uses with the Vortex, and they get results, and they're attributing it to the intake, which is an incorrect conclusion. It's actually the inlet elbow. And this was the 6th example I've seen of somebody going and concluding their intake made the difference. So just to be very clear, it is this part that is making the difference, not going from an APR intake or a racing line intake or an integrated engineering intake to the Blaze. It's getting a appropriately sized inlet elbow for the turbocharger. So hopefully that'll help some of you not spend $350 to $400 unless you want to. It's a good intake, nothing wrong with it, but you're spending money. If you've already got one of those other intakes, you're spending money in areas that you don't need to. So hope that helps somebody out.